Hey everyone, welcome back to JP's Budget Collecting and our weekly look back at the hot comics from 6 months ago. This week we're looking back at the hot comics from May 20th, 2022, and I'm recording this a little bit early this week. I'm recording this on Tuesday, November 15th, 2022. I give you those dates so you know when I got this information, so when it's actually relevant, because the market is always moving and changing. But the trends, tend to be fairly consistent. As always, we're looking back at the CBSI Hot Top 10 and the Comic Tom Key Collector Hottest Trending Comics of the Week. This week we got 17 books to look at between the two lists. And as always, we're doing this so we understand what made these books hot, what factors were affecting them then, what's happened since, so we know what books to be patient on and what books to chase in the moment. If you've been following for pretty much all of 22, the story's been be patient. That does not change this week, but let's dig into this and see what we can learn. First up, we got The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, #1 from 1999. This Alan Moore project that was basically, we got news that they were working on rebooting it either as a show or a movie. Deadline was reporting this, so it was fairly solid reporting that something was coming. They tried this once before, it failed, but we will see what happens this time. But it's caused raw copies of the #1 to jump to $40 to $50. 9.8 hit $330, and now it's a $10 to $30 book for a raw copy. 9.8 $120 to $150. So this has already turned into a trap. Again, we're away from the news. We're still a long ways from any sort of a project. This is extremely typical. This one jumped higher than a lot of times they do for auction stuff, but this one has come tumbling back down. And yeah, that's extremely normal for any kind of option news related stuff. Next, we're going to move into covers. We got several covers this week. Most of the list this week is dominated by MCU stuff, but we do have several covers. And first up, we have Catwoman #43, the Sozamaki 1 in 25. This is the Harley and Selena cover. This one I actually liked and actually have. The only one of those 1 in 25s I went on and got. Back then, raw copies right after release were going for 60 to 75, so right around almost triple ratio, which usually means they have a tendency to, if they get above triple, I say they're usually kind of worth it. If they don't quite, usually I'll be back. This one I went on and called worth it because I thought it had a chance to really stay with these two characters. And it's 40 to 100 right now, so right all around this range. 9.8 will cost you 120 to 200. As we'll see, this book did go higher later. In the coming weeks, we're going to see that this book went higher, and it wasn't necessarily worth it. But if you got it this first week, you did okay. So yeah, I'm calling this one steady and worth it from this initial rush to get it. But it has held on to this, but it's still actually down from the peak, which we will talk about in future weeks. Next, we have Amazing Spider-Man #1, the Clayton Crane MegaCon variant, the ASM 301 homage. Said back then, did we really need another homage to this particular cover? But people were chasing it. This con variant, it was up to 110 plus on average on secondary market. Now it's a $35 to $80 book. 9.8 only costs you 70 to 175. So there's actually 9.8 sales lower than a couple of the raw sales. But overall, yeah, this is down in a trap. This one has not held. I like Clayton Crane, but there's nothing really special about this particular homage to me that would make me want to chase it. Next, we have Hulk #6, also a Clayton Crane MegaCon variant that people were chasing. That was also going for 110 plus back then. Now it's a $25 to $80 book, 1 to 150 on a 9.8, and also a trap. There was no real key here, and it's a cool Hulk cover, but not necessarily one that is iconic in any necessary way, and it has not necessarily held up as a result. All right, next we have a book that was on the list last week, making it again. This is Grimm #1, the Jenny Frison 1 in 100. Back then, it was in the week two. Last week we talked about it was 110, 130. Now it's by the second week, it was up to 175 to 200, so almost double that 1 in 100 ratio. As we talked about last week, there's only been 4 recent sales since the beginning of October. Raw copies have went for 115 and 180. 9.8 have went for 130 and 200. Not necessarily in those 4 orders, but those are the only 4 recent sales. Still calling this a down, and I'll be back like I talked about it. But, I mean, obviously, if you were paying 200 for raw, it probably was a little bit on the trap. This book is definitely slowed down in the market. and it's coming down a little bit from where it peaked. But you did okay. I mean, if you bought it initially, but not so good if you kind of waited too long. Next, we have New Mutants, number 25. This is the Art Germ 1 in 50 of Madeline Pryor, the Goblin Queen, that was going for 80 to 90. So not quite double ratio. So I figured this would definitely be an I'll be back to a trap, just because it was not quite double. Like I said, not quite, a 1 in 50 not making double ratio usually doesn't hold real well. This one's still going 40 to 100, but most of the sales are in the 40, 60, 70 range, not the 100. 9.8, you can actually get a 70. There's been 70 to 125 on 9.8, so they're overlapping with some of the raw sales. Don't confuse it. There is a version that's a 1 in 100 that goes for a little bit more, but this trade dress is definitely down and I'll be back compared to what it was back then. Our last cover of the week is Elektra, Black, White, and Blood, number 4, the Kevin Eastman 1 in 25. Don't get a lot of Eastman covers on other characters. He does a few. So Eastman fans usually jump on these. Happened here as well. 40 to 50 for this 1 in 25. But again, only double or less. Usually not going to hold. Usually ends up either ratio or less. Same thing here. This is now a $10 to $30 book. And definitely turned into a trap. People, not a particularly epic Elektra cover, because there are some of those. A good one, but just not one that's really been able to hold. All right, with that, we had kind of one cover / comic buzz. I don't exactly know what this, you could call this cover, and this is Incredible Hulk number 340. Classic cover here, classic Wolverine Hulk cover. Back then, raw copies jumped up, we're going for 200. 9.8 hit $1,700. Now, raw copies are kind of in the 65, 175 range, so they've drifted down a little bit. 9.8 still hitting 15 to 1,800. So a little bit of an I'll be back on this, down just a touch from where it was back in the spring. But obviously really good value on this, and obviously long term this is a straight cash book. It's probably never like coming down a ton, and it's slowly just going to continue to creep up over the years. But definitely one of the more popular Hulk Wolverine covers for sure. All right, with that, it's all the rest of the list is MCU, rumors, news, actual things happening. First up, we got Captain Carter number 1. This had been off the list and now back on. This is just the cover A. Obviously, this is still in the aftermath of the appearance in Multiverse of Madness, but also some rumors about maybe would get her own spinoff from the What If show. We'll see what we get there. So yeah, this is her first appearance. Raw copies 10 to 15 on this A cover. 9.8 was hitting 220 back then. Now raw copies are $5 to $20. So they're pretty much kind of in the worth it, fairly steady range. But 9.8 you can get for $40 to $75 plus shipping on these. Most of these are without shipping, but still $40 to $75. That is a huge dumpster fire if you were paying $200 plus for 9.8 back then. Definitely, if you think Captain Carter has a future, now might be a time to try to snag up a few of these before it starts jumping again. Because, yeah, if you can get pre-made 9.8 basically for the cost of slabbing one and getting it shipped to you. So, all right. Next, we have Fantastic Four, number 245, first appearance of Franklin Richards as an adult. And again, this had everything to do with Multiverse of Madness. Reed had mentioned he had kids. But we're probably not getting that version of Reed ever again, so don't know that this is ever going to happen, but people were jumping on this book back then. Raw copies were averaging 18. 9.8 hit 300. Now it's still a $5 to $20 book for a raw copy, but most of their sales are in the 10-ish range, definitely down. 9.8 will cost you 150 to 200. So down, and I'll be back. Borderline, you could call this a trap on this one, but definitely down, and not a lot of interest necessarily at the moment in Franklin Richards. We're going to get Fantastic Four eventually. We'll probably eventually get Franklin if they continue with this version of the universe and don't do a complete reset to bring some of these characters back. But yeah, it's going to be a while probably before we get Franklin. Next, we have Punisher number 1, first ongoing series. And basically this had everything to do with rumors back then that they were going to bring back all the Netflix. We're going to bring back at least some of the Netflix versions. We'd already known at this point that Charlie Cox was being used again. We didn't know for sure how they were going to use them again. We now know he's getting his own series. Vincent D'Onofrio is back. And now we know that John Bernthal is going to be back as Punisher. So that's all happened since then. But back then, raw copies were jumping up to around 50. 9.8s were hitting 300. Now it's a $15, $40 book on Raw. 9.8, 2 to 300. So not a lot of buzz at the moment. So the book is kind of back where it normally sets. Maybe a little higher than where it was setting before all this. But yeah, it's a good book. Not a huge value book because there are quite a few of them out there, but definitely some value here. But I'll be back from when it hit the list back in the spring. Next, we have Angela, Queen of Hell, number 6. This is the first meeting of Jane Foster as Thor and Angela. And this hit the list because people were specking we might get Angela in Love and Thunder. We did not. But back then, it hit the list because a single copy sold for $75 plus. That's why they put it on the list. Wasn't a ton of sales. Yeah, so it had previously been like a $10 or $15 book, or like something's happening. Seems more like an outlier sale to me, but yeah, if you paid $75, this is a dumpster fire. It's now a $10 to $30 book, which is actually up a little bit from what it was before, but 9.8 recently, there's only one sale, but it went for 40. Yeah, this was not necessarily a good investment at all. Next, we have Marvel Superheroes, Secret Wars, number 3. The first appearance of Titania. So the rest of these books are all had to do with the She-Hulk trailer dropping. So first Titania, raw copies back then were hitting 35, 9.8, 250, 270. The show was come and gone. She was in the show a ton, but kind of an alternate version a little bit, not exactly the classic version. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the show, but I know some people didn't. But now it's a $5 to $25 book, 9.8, only 80 to 125. So definitely a trap on this one, which you can say is because the show wasn't good or whatever, but that's just been the pattern on all of these, whether people like the show or not. All these books have come crashing back down as soon as the show is over. For all the shows. Next, we have Incredible Hulk, number 282, first team up of Hulk and She-Hulk. And back then, raw copies were averaging 75, and 9.8 at 600. Now it's a $5 to $50 book, 9.8, 250. Yeah, this is a trap. Not a surprise here that this was a trap. We did get to see them together in the show, but yeah, definitely a trap here. Next, we have Marvel Team Up, number 121, the first appearance of Frogman, who was in the trailer, was hinted at, and did appear in the show. Back then, raw copies were going for 35 to 50, 9.8 hitting 550. I basically made a joke about lighting your money on fire if you were chasing this particular character. I predicted a dumpster fire here. It was a dumpster fire. It's now a $1 to $20 book at 9.8, 175. Yeah, he was in the show. It didn't matter long-term for the value, why you would buy it based on that trailer. It was never a good idea. He was in basically one episode as a one-off kind of villain, which is kind of what I predicted. Next, we have Daredevil number 25, first appearance of LeapFrog, which is Frogman's dad. We didn't really get him, but raw copies of this jumped up to $50 to $75. Interestingly enough, this one's actually done better, even though he didn't appear. Raw copies now are 10 to 100. Really, this is an old book. It's a Silver Age book. Condition really varies here, so a really high-grade copy did go for 100, but most of these sales are $20, $30 range. But I want to give the full range here. Calling this more of a down, I'll be back. You could argue it's actually still a trap / dumpster fire, but there are some sales in the similar range, although most of them are lower. But yeah, LeapFrog, Frogman, either one of them amounted to much. And then last but not least on our list this week is Savage She-Hulk, number 1, the first appearance of She-Hulk. Back then, raw copies were averaging 250, 9.8s were 1,000. Mind you, this is still a little bit lower than what it peaked at when we first got news of the show. So news of the show actually took this book higher than the trailer did, and the show itself didn't really spike the book all that much, which is a new pattern that's really formed in 22, is that the movie and the show is actually not even as high as trailer and news in terms of value on these books, which is something that hadn't been happening before, but it's happening a lot lately with the Marvel stuff. Raw copies now, 40 to 160, 9.8 costs you 5 to 600. This has definitely turned into a trap. And yeah, we're not that far away from the show, but honestly, even by the time the show happened, it was basically a trap, and it stayed there. So that is this week's list. I want to thank you guys for watching, and we will catch you next time. Later.